So yeah, I'm actually very fond of the of that approach to combat tracking and everything that Warhammer 3 uses. Between that kind of approach and between the concept of areas or zones, that's really my comfort zone. That's really kind of my preference when I want to track things in role-playing games in terms of mapping and combat. I don't like dealing with. I've noticed a number of different issues with my own engagement and with the way other players engage with the game. When you really get too deep into the thinking in terms of, you know, increments of 5 feet, everything has to fit into a neat little square, and but like you said, also just the general trend of games to like focus on what's going on the table. To the extent of, you know, how many different effects are going around, and then having like little representations. Now, I do, when systems do kind of go to that level of detail and complexity, I do like that. You know, some games, and actually some companies that create support products that support these games, kind of like the little chits and stuff that you were showing off in your video, or the stuff that, you know, how Warhammer 3rd Edition is a very kind of bits intensive game, but really I like it when those bits are really just there to kind of serve as reminders or something for the players to know what's going on, to know how certain things affect their characters, so it reduces rules lookups. But only when that's, you know, only when the game system isn't throwing like 20 or 30 of these things around the table all the time, you know, at which point even those little kind of physical reminders become cumbersome, because then you have to track all these different types of damage or all these different types of effects, and then rolling for, you know, saving throws to cancel duration and all this kind of stuff. And so so I agree. I really can relate to the trouble that you're experiencing, because again, it was one of the reasons why I've kind of grown apart from Dungeons and Dragons 3rd Edition, and why I tried getting into 4th Edition and it didn't really click with me. And it's just because that I feel a break in immersion, which some people don't feel. Some people actually feel more connected to the game when they see physical representations on the table. But I felt that there was so much attention being paid to the miniatures, to increments of 5 feet, to making everything kind of sync up, and to almost like having this kind of RPG GPS system that gives you this precision, that I just kind of felt was distracting me. And it would influence my role-playing, it would influence my immersion, and it also influences the way you play the game, because you play the game a little more strategically, in fact much more strategically, when you have to think in those terms. I also like combat to generally be like very messy, and people are constantly kind of wading back and forth and circling each other and jumping off walls and stuff like that. And you don't get that kind of a dynamic, cinematic kind of feel when you're seeing these like little chess pieces, you know, laid out neatly into their little squares, and you know, this character gets to move 20 feet, and this character gets to move 15 feet, and this character gets to move 5 feet in that direction, and this attack pushes this guy 5 feet in that direction. And you know, and I understand. I actually understand the appeal, and I would agree that D&D 3rd Edition, even D&D 4th Edition, you know, do what they do very well. And if you want that kind of strategic level of play, you really get that experience. I mean, you really, it's really kind of unparalleled in my experience with RPGs in terms of that depth into the combat as a strategy. But that's not really why I play RPGs. I don't really go into them looking for that kind of strategic value. I'm more about kind of the story immersion, about kind of like the impromptu kind of stimulus response interaction of the GM creating something and seeing how the players react, and the players creating something and seeing how the GM reacts. And you know, that there's no right or wrong answer, that you just kind of use your best judgment, come up with something off the top of your head, and then, you know, see how it plays out. And so I also like to keep the pacing of my games at an even flow. And again, when you're really miniatures intensive, when you're really combat grid intensive, the game actually slows down. You know, you're not dealing with things in the same flow that you are during the role-playing scenes. And for me, I call it slamming my fingers in the car door. it's that effect where it's like there's a sudden switch that goes off in my head that I realize, okay, I'm in combat time now, and the game's not going to flow the same way. And whereas I'm used to and I like and I encourage through the ways that I kind of try to handle combat management, that the game should be flowing pretty much evenly. Role-playing should kind of just ebb and flow into and out of combat. A roll for initiative should not change the way that the game plays. It should not change the way that my characters are coming to me with information or the way that I'm delivering information to the players. So I totally understand your frustrations, and I hope it doesn't get you down too much. I hope maybe some of these insights into some other options, into some other ways that combat management can be handled, both to make it a little more simplistic on you, a little less kind of cumbersome for you as the GM, but also kind of throwing the players a bone to give them a little more detail, give them a little more depth, maybe give them a little more strategy to the game. I hope that maybe that's kind of helped you to see maybe different ways that you could approach it. You don't even have to change game systems. You can easily, the thing I like about those kinds of concepts like zones and areas, and even kind of the abstract way that Warhammer 3 deals with combat range, it's not system dependent at all, really. I mean, you'd have to kind of change one or two things, like 120-foot range for a longbow is X zones, or it's long range, or whatever it is. You just kind of would have to change a couple of minor things, but really it doesn't influence much of the game mechanics at all, so it's not hard to kind of incorporate those systems into games that do use more implicit movement. It would be a little more difficult for, say, like 4th edition or even 3.5, where you're kind of dealing with on a much more microscopic scale, because you're talking about 5-foot steps, and you're talking about attacks of opportunity and threat ranges, and you're talking about pushing and pulling and sliding and all that kind of stuff, which is a little, it demands that precision, which happens to be a precision that I don't like. But you could do that with those other games, and as long as the players know beforehand that, if you're communicating with them that, hey, I kind of want to see, let's play it by ear, let's kind of do like a little more fast and loose, like abstract style combat system, and maybe your players will be up for that, and maybe it won't affect the game that much. I'd love to hear what you think about anything that I've kind of like showcased here, or maybe any questions you have about some other types of approaches that I have when I'm dealing with combat in my games. And so, I hope it maybe kind of brings you up a little bit, kind of brings you out of a rut. I understand I'm constantly battling with the concept of minis and how focused they are in a lot of RPGs, and how some players kind of demand that they have that level of focus, and it's just a drag on my games too. And so I definitely understand where you're coming from, and I hope maybe this encourages you a little bit. So I hope to hear from you. Let me know how it goes, and best of wishes.